Rachel stared at her laptop screen, watching the cursor blink at the end of another rejection email. "Thank you for your interest, but we've decided to go with another designer." She'd read those words so many times this month that they barely stung anymore. Almost. She glanced at her coffee cup. Still half full, but it had gone cold 20 minutes ago. The cafe was her office, her sanctuary, and unfortunately her biggest expense. $3 for a coffee that she nursed for 4 hours wasn't exactly sustainable, but the Wi-Fi was free, and the corner table by the window had become her daily spot. The lunch crowd was starting to pour in. Rachel watched as every empty table filled up with chattering office workers and students. She pulled her laptop closer, trying to make herself smaller. She knew she should probably leave and make room for actual paying customers, but she had nowhere else to go. Her tiny apartment was too depressing, and the library closed too early. "Excuse me?" Rachel looked up to see a man standing beside her table. He was tall, wearing a navy blue suit that looked expensive but wrinkled like he'd been wearing it all day. His dark hair was slightly messy, and he had tired eyes that somehow still managed to be kind. "I'm so sorry to bother you," he continued, "but would you mind if we shared your table? Everywhere else is taken." That's when Rachel noticed the little girl standing behind him. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, with curly brown hair and 2 neat pigtails and a pink backpack that was almost as big as she was. The child looked tired and hungry, shifting from one foot to the other. Rachel had always been protective of her workspace. This table was her routine, her comfort zone. She came here specifically to avoid interacting with people, but something about the way the man asked, not demanding or entitled, just genuinely hopeful, made her nod. "Of course," she said, closing her laptop partway. "Please sit down." "Thank you so much," the man said, and his relief was obvious. "I'm Michael, and this is my daughter Sophie." "I'm Rachel," she replied, giving Sophie a small wave. The little girl smiled shyly and climbed onto the chair across from her. Michael helped Sophie settle in before sitting down himself. "Sophie, what do you want for lunch?" The little girl studied the menu seriously, her forehead scrunched in concentration. "Can I have the grilled cheese? And the apple juice?" "Of course, sweetheart." Michael looked over at Rachel. "What about you? Can I buy you lunch? It's the least I can do for letting us crash your table." Rachel shook her head quickly. "Oh no, that's not necessary." "I'm fine. Please," Michael insisted. "I can tell you've been here for a while, and that coffee looks pretty cold." He smiled, and Rachel noticed he had laugh lines around his eyes. "Besides, Sophie likes having company, don't you, Soph?" Sophie nodded enthusiastically. "Are you working on something important?" she asked Rachel, pointing at the laptop. "I'm a graphic designer," Rachel explained. "I make pictures and websites for businesses." "That sounds cool. Do you draw?" Rachel couldn't help but smile at Sophie's enthusiasm. "Sometimes."
"Do you like to draw?"
"I love it." Sophie reached into her backpack and pulled out a small sketchbook. "Look, I drew this yesterday." She showed Rachel a crayon drawing of a house with a big tree next to it. 2 stick figures stood in front, one tall, one small. "That's beautiful," Rachel said sincerely. "Is that you and your dad?" Sophie nodded. "We just moved to a new apartment. It doesn't have a big tree like this, but maybe someday." Michael ruffled his daughter's hair gently. "Sophie's the artist in the family. I can barely draw a straight line." When the server came over, Michael ordered grilled cheese and apple juice for Sophie, a sandwich for himself, and despite Rachel's protests, a fresh coffee and soup for her. "Really? You don't have to do this," Rachel said again. "My mom always taught me to be kind to kind people," Michael replied. "You could have said no when I asked to sit here. Most people would have." As they waited for their food, Sophie chattered away about school, her art teacher, and her pet goldfish named Bubble. Michael listened patiently, occasionally asking questions or making gentle corrections when she got too excited and started talking too fast. Rachel found herself drawn into their conversation. There was something refreshing about Sophie's innocent enthusiasm and Michael's obvious devotion to his daughter. When Sophie asked Rachel about her work, she found herself explaining her design projects in simple terms, even showing Sophie some of her portfolio pieces. "Wow, you're really good," Sophie said, staring at Rachel's tablet screen. "Can you teach me how to do that?" "Sophie," Michael warned gently, "don't put Rachel on the spot." "It's okay," Rachel said, surprised by how much she meant it. "I'd be happy to show you a few things." She opened a simple drawing app and handed Sophie the tablet. Within minutes, Sophie was creating colorful digital doodles, her tongue poking out in concentration, just like when she'd been studying the menu. Michael watched his daughter with such obvious love and pride that Rachel felt a little flutter in her chest. It had been a long time since she'd seen that kind of genuine affection. "She's amazing," Rachel said quietly. "She's my whole world," Michael replied, and there was something in his voice, a hint of worry, maybe even loneliness, that made Rachel wonder about their story. When their food arrived, Sophie insisted on showing Rachel different techniques for digital drawing between bites of her grilled cheese. Michael apologized several times for his daughter's chatter, but Rachel waved him off. "I work alone most of the time," she admitted. "It's nice to have company." "What's it like being a freelancer?" Michael asked. "It must be challenging." Rachel almost laughed. "That's one way to put it. Some months are better than others." She took a sip of her fresh coffee. It was perfect. "But I love what I do. I just wish more people appreciated good design." "They don't know what they're missing," Michael said, and something in his tone made her think he understood more about business than he was letting on. As they finished eating, Rachel realized she'd been sitting at the cafe for over an hour without once checking her email or worrying about finding new clients. Sophie's laughter was infectious, and Michael's easy conversation had made her forget her troubles. "We should probably get going," Michael said eventually, glancing at his watch. "Sophie has dance class at 3. "Aw, do we have to?" Sophie asked, but she was already packing up her sketchbook. Michael pulled out his wallet, but Rachel noticed he didn't count bills or check his balance like she always had to. He just left enough cash to cover their meals plus a generous tip. "Thank you again," he said to Rachel as they stood up. "You really saved us today." "It was my pleasure," Rachel replied, and meant it completely. Sophie hugged Rachel's arm impulsively. "Will you be here tomorrow? I want to show you my drawing homework." Rachel looked up at Michael, who shrugged with an amused smile. "We come here most days around lunchtime. Sophie loves the hot chocolate." "Then maybe I'll see you tomorrow," Rachel said. As they walked away, Sophie waving goodbye through the window, Rachel realized she was smiling for the first time in weeks. She opened her laptop again, but instead of job hunting, she found herself sketching. Something about their encounter had sparked her creativity in a way that felt almost magical. She had no idea that simple act of kindness would change everything. The next day, Rachel arrived at the cafe earlier than usual. She told herself it was because she wanted to get more work done, but deep down she knew she was hoping to see Michael and Sophie again. When noon came and went with no sign of them, she felt surprisingly disappointed. It was almost 1 o'clock when Sophie came bouncing through the cafe door, her backpack bouncing with each step. Michael followed behind, looking slightly harried but smiling when he spotted Rachel at their usual table. "Rachel!" Sophie called out, waving enthusiastically. Several other customers turned to look, but Rachel didn't mind. The little girl's excitement was infectious. "Hey there, Sophie," Rachel said, closing her laptop to make room. "How was school?" "We learned about butterflies today," Sophie said, climbing into the chair across from Rachel. "Did you know they taste with their feet?" "I didn't know that," Rachel laughed. "That's pretty cool." Michael sat down with a tired sigh. "Sorry we're late. Meeting ran longer than expected." "Long day at work?" Rachel asked. "Something like that," Michael replied vaguely. "What about you? How's the freelancing world treating you today?" Rachel made a face. 2 more rejections this morning. I'm starting to think I should put professional rejection collector on my business cards." "Their loss," Michael said simply. And something about the way he said it made Rachel believe he meant it. Over the next few weeks, their lunchtime meetings became a routine. Rachel found herself looking forward to them more than she cared to admit. Sophie would burst through the door with stories about school, new drawings to show, or questions about everything from why the sky was blue to how computers worked. Michael would listen patiently, ask thoughtful questions, and somehow always managed to make Rachel feel like her work mattered. "Tell me about your dream job," Michael said one Thursday afternoon while Sophie was coloring in her new art book. "If money wasn't an issue, what would you be doing?" Rachel stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "I'd have my own design studio. Not huge or fancy, just mine. I'd work with small businesses, nonprofits, people who really care about what they're doing but don't have huge budgets for marketing." "Why those kinds of clients?" "Because they need good design just as much as the big companies do. maybe more. And they actually appreciate creativity instead of just wanting whatever's trendy. Rachel realized she was getting passionate and tried to tone it down. Sorry, I get carried away talking about this stuff. Don't apologize, Michael said seriously. It's obvious you love what you do. That's rare. What about you? Rachel asked. What do you do when you're not having lunch with us? Michael hesitated for just a moment. I work in acquisitions, corporate stuff. Pretty boring, actually. Daddy helps companies, Sophie added helpfully without looking up from her coloring. He talks on the phone a lot and types on his computer. Sounds about right, Michael laughed, but Rachel noticed he changed the subject quickly. As the weeks passed, Rachel learned more about their situation. Michael was recently divorced, something Sophie mentioned matter-of-factly one day when talking about her 2 bedrooms. Mommy lives in a big house now with her new friend, Sophie explained while drawing a picture of a castle. But I like Daddy's apartment better because we have movie nights. Rachel glanced at Michael, who gave a slight shake of his head that said, "Please don't ask." She didn't, but she did notice things. Michael never talked about money, but he never seemed worried about it either. He always insisted on paying for their meals, tipping generously, and when Sophie spilled juice on her new school dress, he didn't flinch at the dry cleaning bill the way Rachel would have. He also got a lot of phone calls. He'd always apologize and step outside to take them, coming back looking slightly stressed but trying to hide it. "Everything okay?" Rachel asked after one particularly long call. "Just work stuff," Michael said, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. Sophie had become completely attached to Rachel. She brought drawings to show her, asked for help with art projects, and even requested that Rachel teach her how to use design software. "Are you sure you don't mind?" Michael asked one afternoon as Sophie enthusiastically explained her latest digital creation. "She can be a lot." "Are you kidding?" "She's amazing," Rachel said, watching Sophie add rainbow colors to a digital flower. "She has a real eye for design. She gets that from someone other than me," Michael laughed. "I can barely match my socks." "Daddy, your socks are fine," Sophie said without looking up. "Rachel, can you show me how to make the flower sparkle, as I call?" Rachel helped Sophie add special effects to her drawing. She noticed Michael watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. It was soft and grateful, but also sad somehow. "You're really good with her," he said quietly. "She makes it easy," Rachel replied. "She's smart and creative and funny. You're doing a great job raising her." Michael's smile was genuine but tired. "Some days I wonder. Balancing work and being a single parent, it's harder than I thought it would be." "I can't imagine how difficult that must be," Rachel said. "But look at her. She's confident, happy, curious about everything. That doesn't happen by accident." "Thank you," Michael said, and Rachel could tell he needed to hear it. Their conversations grew deeper as the weeks went by. Michael told her about his fears of not being enough for Sophie, about missing important moments because of work, about the guilt that came with divorce even when it was the right choice. Rachel shared her own struggles, the student loans that kept her awake at night, the feast or famine cycle of freelancing, the loneliness of working by herself all the time. "I used to think I wanted to work for one of the big agencies," she admitted one day. "Steady paycheck, health insurance, all that. But now I'm not so sure." "Why not?" "I guess I like the freedom, even if it's scary sometimes. And I like working with people who actually care about their businesses instead of just treating design like a box to check." Michael nodded thoughtfully. Freedom's worth more than most people realize. "Easy to say when you're not eating ramen for the 3rd night in a row," Rachel laughed, but there was no bitterness in it. "You know," Michael said carefully, "if you ever want someone to look at your business plan or help you think through the financial side of starting a studio, I'd be happy to help. I deal with that kind of stuff at work." "That's really kind of you," Rachel said, "but I couldn't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering." There was something in his tone that made Rachel look at him more closely. Sometimes when he talked about business, he sounded like he knew more than just acquisitions for some random company. But before she could think about it too much, Sophie was tugging on her sleeve. "Rachel, look, I made a picture of all of us at our table." The drawing showed 3 stick figures sitting around a brown rectangle. One had long hair and was holding what looked like a computer. One was tall with dark hair, and one was small with curly pigtails and a big smile. "That's beautiful, Sophie," Rachel said, and meant it. As they packed up to leave, Michael lingering longer than usual, Rachel realized something that both excited and scared her. These lunch meetings had become the best part of her day. She was growing attached to both of them in ways that probably weren't wise. But as Sophie hugged her goodbye and promised to bring another drawing tomorrow, Rachel decided she didn't care about whys. Some things were worth the risk. It started with a simple text message on a Tuesday morning. Rachel was struggling through another rejection email when her phone buzzed. "Sophie has a half day today. Want to grab coffee around 11? Michael." Rachel stared at the message for a full minute. Somehow, meeting outside their usual lunch routine felt different, more intentional. She typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on a simple, "Sure, see you then." When she arrived at the cafe, Michael was already waiting with 2 cups of coffee and what looked like nervous energy. "I hope I got your order right," he said, standing when she approached. Medium coffee, splash of cream, no sugar. The fact that he'd memorized her coffee order made something flutter in Rachel's chest. "Perfect, thank you." They settled at their usual table, but without Sophie's chatter to fill the space. The atmosphere felt different, more intimate. "So," Michael said, then seemed to lose his words. "So?" Rachel repeated with a smile. "How's Sophie doing with her new art project?" "She's obsessed with it." Michael laughed, and Rachel could see his shoulders relax. "She spent 2 hours last night working on digital flowers. I think you've created a monster." "The best kind of monster," Rachel said. "She has real talent." "She adores you, you know," Michael said quietly. "I haven't seen her this excited about anything since before the divorce." There was something vulnerable in his voice that made Rachel's heart skip. "She's easy to adore, you both are." The words slipped out before Rachel could stop them, and she felt her cheeks heat up. But Michael's smile was worth the embarrassment. "Would you maybe want to do something this weekend?" he asked. "Sophie's been asking about the art museum, and I thought, if you're free." "I'd love that," Rachel said, probably too quickly. That Saturday, Rachel met them at the museum entrance. Sophie was practically bouncing with excitement, wearing a purple dress with paint stains that her father had clearly given up trying to remove. "Rachel, did you know they have real paintings here that are like 100 years old?" "Even older than that," Rachel laughed, taking Sophie's hand as they walked inside. Watching Michael with Sophie in the museum was like seeing a whole different side of him. He was patient when she wanted to spend 20 minutes staring at one painting, enthusiastic when she made up stories about what the people in portraits were thinking, and gentle when she got tired and cranky. "You're a natural at this," Rachel told him as they sat on a bench while Sophie studied a sculpture. "I'm learning as I go," Michael admitted. "I used to travel for work constantly. I miss so much of her early years that I'm trying to make up for it now." "What kind of work required that much travel?" Rachel asked. Michael hesitated, just like he always did when work came up. "Just corporate stuff, meetings, negotiations, pretty boring." Before Rachel could ask more, Sophie came running back with questions about how artists made bronze sculptures, and the moment passed. Over the following weeks, their weekend outings became regular. The zoo, where Sophie insisted on drawing every animal they saw. The park, where Michael pushed Sophie on swings while Rachel sketched them both. The children's theater, where all 3 of them got completely absorbed in a puppet show. Rachel found herself planning her weeks around these moments. She turned down other social invitations, rearranged client calls, and even splurged on a new dress for their museum trips. But the more time she spent with them, the more she noticed odd things about Michael, like how he never invited her to his apartment. They always met in public places, and when Sophie mentioned their movie nights at home, Michael would quickly change the subject, or how he seemed to know people who didn't seem to know him. At the museum, a well-dressed woman had stared at him with recognition, but when Michael noticed, he'd steered them in the opposite direction. And then there were the phone calls. They happened everywhere during Sophie's art class while they waited for their food, even in the middle of conversations. Michael would always apologize, step away and come back looking slightly stressed but trying to hide it. "Everything okay?" Rachel asked after one particularly tense, looking call during their park visit. "Just work," Michael said, but his jaw was tight. "Sorry about that." "You work a lot of weekends for corporate acquisitions," Rachel observed gently. Michael looked at her sharply, then seemed to catch himself. "Yeah, it's demanding." The strangest incident happened at the children's theater. They were waiting in the lobby when a man in an expensive suit approached them. "Michael Sterling? I thought that was you. How are you handling the—" "I think you have me confused with someone else," Michael said quickly, his hand finding Sophie's shoulder protectively. The man looked confused but backed away. Rachel pretended to study the theater program, but she definitely heard Sterling, and the man had seemed very certain about who Michael was. Despite these mysteries, Rachel found herself falling deeper for both Michael and Sophie. Michael was kind, funny, and completely devoted to his daughter. He listened to Rachel's work frustrations with genuine interest, celebrated her small victories, and made her feel like her dreams of opening her own studio weren't just fantasy, and Sophie had become like the little sister Rachel never had. She saved her best drawings for Rachel, asked for advice on everything from art supplies to friendship drama at school, and had started calling their weekend outings family time. The word family made Rachel's heart ache with longing she hadn't expected. Then came the day everything shifted. Rachel was at the cafe, working frantically on a project proposal that was due in 2 hours, when her laptop screen suddenly went black. She tried everything, restarting, checking the power cord, even the old trick of hitting it gently. Nothing worked. No, she muttered, panic rising in her chest. This proposal could mean steady work for 3 months. She couldn't afford to miss the deadline. "Rachel?" Michael's voice made her look up. He and Sophie were standing by her table looking concerned. "What's wrong?" "My laptop died," Rachel said, trying not to cry. "I have a huge proposal due in 2 hours and I can't afford to get it fixed right now." Michael sat down immediately. "What kind of proposal?" "Maybe I can help. It's for a non-profit that helps homeless veterans. They need a complete rebrand. Logo, website, marketing materials. It's exactly the kind of work I want to be doing, but if I can't submit it today—" "Use my laptop," Michael said without hesitation, pulling a sleek MacBook from his bag. "I'll drive you to wherever you need to submit it in person if necessary." "I can't use your computer," Rachel protested. "What if I mess something up?" "You won't. And even if you did, it's just a computer, just a computer." Rachel stared at the laptop, which looked like it cost more than her rent. Who casually carried around equipment that expensive? "Rachel," Michael said gently. "Let me help you." "I appreciate it, but I can't," Rachel said firmly. "I'll figure something out. Don't be stubborn about this." "It's not charity, it's just helping a friend." "It feels like charity," Rachel admitted. "I can't afford to replace your laptop if something happens to it. I can't afford to fix my own laptop. I can't afford much of anything lately, and taking your expensive computer feels like—" "Like what?" "Like I'm some kind of charity case you and Sophie picked up at the cafe." Michael's face went pale. "That's not how I see you at all, isn't it? The struggling artist who needs rescuing." "Rachel, that's not—" But Rachel was already packing up her broken laptop. The proposal would have to wait. Her pride was all she had left, and she wasn't ready to give that up too. "I should go," she said, avoiding his eyes. "Please don't leave like this," Michael said, but Rachel was already walking away. She didn't see the confused and hurt look on Sophie's face, or the way Michael ran his hands through his hair in frustration. She was too busy trying not to cry until she got outside. Rachel spent the next 3 days avoiding the cafe entirely. She worked from the library, from coffee shops across town, anywhere but the place where she might run into Michael and Sophie. Her laptop was still broken, which meant typing everything on her phone or borrowing computers at the library. It was miserable, but it felt better than facing the hurt she'd seen in Michael's eyes. On Thursday evening, her friend Lisa called while Rachel was heating up another cup of ramen noodles for dinner. "You sound terrible," Lisa said without preamble. "What's wrong?" "Just work stuff," Rachel lied, stirring the noodles mechanically. "Uh-huh. This wouldn't have anything to do with the mystery man and his daughter you've been spending all your time with, would it?" Rachel had mentioned Michael and Sophie to Lisa a few times, but she'd been careful not to make it sound too important. Apparently she hadn't been careful enough. We had a disagreement, Rachel admitted. About what? It doesn't matter. It's over anyway. Rachel, you've been happier these past few weeks than I've seen you in months. If this guy matters to you, it doesn't matter how I feel, Rachel interrupted. We're from completely different worlds. I was stupid to think otherwise. Lisa was quiet for a moment. What do you mean, different worlds? Rachel found herself telling Lisa everything. The expensive laptop, the mysterious phone calls, the way Michael never seemed worried about money, how people seemed to recognize him but he avoided them. Lisa said when Rachel finished. What did you say his last name was? I don't think he ever told me, Rachel realized. He always just said Michael. That's weird, right? After all this time? It was weird. Rachel had been so caught up in their connection that she hadn't really thought about it. But what kind of person doesn't share their last name after weeks of spending time together? You know what, Lisa said, I'm coming over. And I'm bringing my laptop. Lisa, you don't have to. I'm bringing Chinese food too. The good stuff, not whatever sodium bomb you're probably eating. An hour later, Lisa was sitting on Rachel's tiny couch with containers of pad thai and spring rolls spread across the coffee table. Okay, Lisa said, opening her laptop. Describe this guy to me. Why? Just humor me. I have a feeling about this. Rachel sighed but described Michael. Tall, dark hair, kind eyes, well-dressed but not flashy. Probably in his early 30s. And he works in acquisitions, travels a lot for work. Recently divorced with a 7-year-old daughter named Sophie, Lisa said, typing as Rachel spoke. What are you doing? Just checking something. Lisa paused her typing. You said people seemed to recognize him at the museum and the theater. Maybe. I could have been imagining it. Lisa pulled up a local newspaper website and started scrolling through their society pages. Let's see. Charity events, galas, business news. Lisa, this is ridiculous. You're not going to find him on some random... Holy shit. What? Lisa turned the laptop screen toward Rachel. There in a photo from last month's Children's Hospital Charity Gala was Michael. He was wearing a tuxedo and shaking hands with the hospital's director. The caption read, Michael Sterling, CEO of Sterling Industries, presents a $500,000 donation to Children's Hospital. Sterling Industries has been a major supporter of local charities since Sterling took over the company 5 years ago. Rachel stared at the screen in shock. That can't be right. Oh, it gets better, Lisa said, clicking on another link. Look at this. A business magazine profile of Michael filled the screen. The headline read, The young CEO who's changing corporate culture. The article talked about how Michael Sterling had transformed his late father's real estate development company into a multi-million-dollar investment firm, focusing on sustainable development and ethical business practices. There were photos of him at business conferences, quotes about work-life balance, and mentions of his recent high-profile divorce from socialite Victoria Sterling. Rachel, Lisa said gently, your cafe guy is worth like $200 million. The container of pad thai slipped from Rachel's hands onto the coffee table. She barely noticed. This has to be a mistake, Rachel whispered. He drives a normal car. He wears regular clothes, She thought about all the expensive little things she'd ignored. The laptop that cost more than her rent. The fact that he never looked at prices on menus. The way he tipped everyone generously without thinking about it. Look, Lisa said, clicking on another article. Here's something about his divorce last year. Apparently his ex-wife got the mansion in the hills in custody of their daughter every other weekend. He kept the downtown penthouse and the vacation homes. Vacation homes. Plural. Rachel felt sick. Every conversation they'd had replayed in her mind. But now with this new information, everything looked different. When she'd complained about her student loans, he'd been sitting on a fortune. When she'd stressed about rent money, he could have bought her building without blinking. Rachel, you okay? Lisa asked. You look really pale. He lied to me, Rachel said quietly. For weeks he lied to me. Maybe he had reasons. What reasons? Rachel stood up abruptly, pacing her tiny living room. I told him everything about my life. My struggles, my fears, my dreams. I was completely honest with him and he just watched me worry about money while sitting on millions of dollars. But maybe he watched me eat ramen every night. He watched me stress about my laptop breaking. He probably thought it was amusing. The poor little artist who can't afford her own equipment. That doesn't sound like the guy you described to me, Lisa said carefully. But Rachel was already spiraling. No wonder he wanted to help with my laptop. It was like throwing change at a home. Less person to make himself feel better. Rachel, stop. You're not being fair. Fair? Rachel laughed bitterly. What's fair about lying to someone for weeks? What's fair about pretending to be something you're not while someone opens their heart to you? Maybe he was trying to protect himself, Lisa suggested. Rich people probably deal with a lot of people who only want their money. So he decided to test me? To see if I was a gold digger? The thought made Rachel feel even more humiliated. God, Lisa, his daughter was calling our outings family time. I actually started thinking. She couldn't finish the sentence. She'd started thinking they could have a real future together. She'd started imagining what it would be like to be Sophie's stepmom, to have the family she'd always wanted. You started thinking what? It doesn't matter. It was all fake anyway. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Then another. Rachel ignored them, but Lisa glanced at the screen. It's him, Lisa said. He's been texting you. I don't want to see them. Rachel? No. Rachel grabbed her phone and deleted the messages without reading them. Whatever he has to say, I don't want to hear it. But even as she said it, part of her wondered what he was trying to explain. Part of her remembered the genuine warmth in his eyes when he looked at her, the way he'd encouraged her dreams, how natural he'd been with Sophie. That night, Rachel lay awake staring at the ceiling. Every memory of the past few weeks felt tainted now. Had any of it been real, or had she just been an entertaining diversion for a bored millionaire? By morning, she'd made her decision. She would go back to the cafe. It was her place first, after all, but if Michael showed up, she'd make it clear that whatever had been between them was over. She arrived at her usual time and settled at her corner table with her broken laptop and a coffee she could barely afford. When noon came and went with no sign of Michael and Sophie, she felt both relieved and strangely disappointed. It wasn't until almost 1 o'clock that she saw Sophie's face pressed against the cafe window, scanning the room. When the little girl spotted Rachel, her face lit up with joy. Rachel's heart clenched as Sophie bounded through the door, Michael following more slowly behind her. Rachel, Sophie called out, running toward the table. We missed you. Where have you been? Daddy said you were busy, but I made you a new drawing and… Sophie, Michael said quietly, reaching for his daughter's hand. Remember what we talked about? Sophie looked confused, glancing between Rachel and her father. But I wanted to show her my butterfly picture. Rachel looked at Michael for the first time since learning the truth. He looked tired, worried, and when their eyes met, she saw something that might have been regret. Hello, Michael, she said coolly. Or should I say Mr. Sterling? His face went pale. Rachel, please. Let me explain. Sophie looked back and forth between Rachel and her father, confusion written all over her face. What's Mr. Sterling? Is that Daddy's work name? Sophie, Michael said gently. Why don't you sit down and color for a few minutes while Rachel and I talk? But I wanted to show her my butterfly, Sophie protested, holding up a colorful drawing. Rachel's heart ached looking at the little girl's hopeful face. Whatever anger she felt toward Michael, Sophie didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of it. It's beautiful, Sophie, Rachel said softly, taking the drawing. You're getting so good at digital art. Sophie beamed and settled into her chair with her coloring book, apparently satisfied now that Rachel had seen her latest creation. Michael sat down across from Rachel, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. I know you have questions. Just one, really, Rachel said, keeping her voice low so Sophie wouldn't hear the hurt in it. Was any of it real? All of it was real, Michael said immediately. Every conversation, every moment we spent together, everything I told you about my feelings, that was all completely real. Except for the part where you lied about who you are. Michael winced. I didn't lie about who I am. I lied about what I do for a living. That's a pretty big part of who someone is, don't you think? Look, I know how this sounds, Michael said, running a hand through his hair. But I need you to understand something. Do you know what it's like to never know if someone likes you or just likes your bank account? Rachel wanted to stay angry, but something in his voice made her really listen. I've had people become my best friend overnight when they found out about Sterling Industries, Michael continued. I've had women who weren't interested in me suddenly find me fascinating after Googling my net worth. I've watched people fake entire personalities just to get close to my money. So you thought I was like that? No, Michael said firmly. That's exactly the point. You were different. You offered to share your table with a stranger and his kid. You spent hours teaching Sophie about art without asking for anything in return. You told me about your dreams and your struggles with complete honesty, even when it made you vulnerable. Rachel felt some of her anger wavering, but she held on to it. So you decided to test me? To see how long I'd be nice to the poor single dad before showing your true colors? That's not what happened, Michael said. At first, yes, I was just grateful for your kindness. But then I started looking forward to seeing you. I started planning my day around lunch at this cafe. And the more time we spent together, the more I realized I was falling for someone who saw me as just Michael. Not Michael Sterling. Not the CEO, just me. But you weren't just being yourself. Rachel pointed out. You were performing a role. Was I? Michael asked. When I listened to you talk about your work, was that fake? When I watched you with Sophie? When I saw how patient and creative and kind you were, was that an act? When I told you about my fears of not being a good enough father, was that a lie? Rachel thought about all their conversations, all the moments that had felt so genuine. But you watched me stress about money. You watched me worry about my laptop, about rent, about everything, and you said nothing. I wanted to help, Michael said. Do you know how hard it was to watch you worry about things I could fix with a phone call? But every time I tried to offer help, you shut me down. Because I don't want to be someone's charity project. And I don't want to be someone's ATM. The words came out sharper than Michael intended, and Sophie looked up from her coloring with worried eyes. Michael took a deep breath and lowered his voice. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to snap. But Rachel, don't you see? We both have walls up. Yours is pride, mine is secrecy. But what we had together was real. Rachel stared at him, processing his words. She thought about all the moments when Michael's guard had been down, when he'd talked about missing Sophie's early years because of work, when he'd admitted his fears about the divorce, when he'd watched her and Sophie together with such genuine happiness in his eyes. Why didn't you just tell me? She asked quietly. When? Michael asked. On the first day when you were kind enough to let us sit with you? Hi, I'm Michael. I'm worth $200 million. On our second meeting when Sophie was drawing you pictures. After weeks of you telling me about your money struggles when I knew you'd feel embarrassed. Rachel had to admit he had a point. There had never been a perfect moment for that kind of revelation. The longer it went on, the harder it became to find the right way to tell you, Michael continued. And honestly, I was terrified that once you knew, everything would change, that you'd start looking at me differently, or that you'd think everything we'd shared was tainted somehow. Well, you were right about that, Rachel said, but there was less bite in her voice than before. I was wrong to keep it from you, Michael admitted. I should have trusted you with the truth. But Rachel, please don't let my mistake destroy what we built together. Sophie had been listening despite her coloring, and now she spoke up in a small voice. Are you and Rachel fighting because of money? Both adults turned to look at her. There were tears in the little girl's eyes. Oh, sweetheart, Rachel said, her heart breaking. We're not fighting exactly. We're just talking through something difficult. Is it because Daddy has lots of money and you don't? Sophie asked with the brutal honesty of childhood. Rachel and Michael exchanged a look over her head. Sort of, Rachel admitted. That's dumb, Sophie said matter-of-factly. Money doesn't matter. You're nice to me and you make Daddy smile. That's what matters. Out of the mouths of babes, Rachel thought. She looked at Michael and saw her own emotions reflected in his face. Love, fear, hope, uncertainty. Sophie's right, Michael said quietly. Money doesn't matter. What matters is that I love you, and I hope you might love me too. The words hung in the air between them. Rachel felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. I do love you, she whispered. Both of you. And that's what makes this so hard. It doesn't have to be hard, Michael said. Yes, I have money. More than I know what to do with, honestly. But that doesn't change how I feel about you, or how Sophie feels about you, or the fact that you've made both our lives so much better. But how do we make this work? Rachel asked. We're from completely different worlds, and are we? Michael asked. We both work hard. We both love Sophie. We both want to build something meaningful. The only difference is the number in my bank account. It's not that simple. Maybe it is, Michael interrupted gently. Maybe it's exactly that simple. Nay, you love me. Sophie loves you. Everything else is just details we can figure out together. Rachel looked at Sophie, who was watching them with hopeful eyes, then back at Michael. She thought about all the moments they'd shared, all the ways he'd supported her dreams and encouraged her work. She thought about how empty the past few days had felt without them. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Me too," Michael said, "but maybe we can be scared together." Rachel took a shaky breath. If we try to make this work, things have to be different. No more secrets. No more secrets, Michael agreed, and no more mysterious phone calls that you disappear for. I'll explain every work call, I promise. And if you want to help with my business someday, we do it as partners, not as charity. Michael smiled. I'd like nothing better than to be your business partner. You have amazing ideas, Rachel. You just need the capital to make them happen. Also, Rachel said, trying to sound stern but failing because of the smile tugging at her lips. You have to let me pay for lunch sometimes. Deal, Michael laughed. Though I reserve the right to spoil you occasionally. Occasionally, Rachel agreed. Sophie had been following this conversation intently, and now she jumped up from her chair. Does this mean we're a family now? Rachel and Michael looked at each other, and Rachel saw her own future reflected in his eyes. Lazy Sunday mornings, art projects with Sophie, building the design studio she'd always dreamed of. Growing old with the two people who'd changed her life in the best possible way. Yeah, Sophie, Rachel said, opening her arms as the little girl launched herself into a hug. I think it does. 6 months later, Rachel stood in the doorway of her new design studio, bright, airy, and everything she'd ever dreamed of. The sign outside read, Rachel Chen Design Studio, creative solutions for businesses that care. Michael wrapped his arms around her from behind. Happy? Incredibly, Rachel said, leaning back against him. Though I still can't believe you convinced that nonprofit to be my first official client. I didn't convince them of anything, Michael protested. I just introduced you. They hired you because your proposal was brilliant. Sophie ran up to them, her face covered in paint from the mural she'd been helping create on the studio's back wall. Rachel, can we have a party to celebrate your new studio? She asked. What kind of party? Rachel asked. The kind with cake, Sophie said, as if this was obvious. I think that can be arranged, Michael said, kissing the top of his daughter's head, then pressing a gentle kiss to Rachel's cheek. As Rachel looked around at her new studio, at the man she loved and the little girl who'd become like her own daughter, she thought about that day in the cafe when she'd almost said no to sharing her table. Sometimes the best things in life came from the smallest acts of kindness. Sometimes taking a chance on a stranger could change everything. And sometimes love really was as simple as two people choosing to build something beautiful together, one day at a time.